Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Special announcement before we get into this fantastic episode. And this really is a good one. Feel like I've been on a bit of a streak lately. Just really, really terrific communicators of science. I think you're going to dig it. I wanted to let you know that we have a special thing we've been putting together over on my other world, Mind Under Matter. With me and Ramin Nazer, we are doing a Mind Under Matter campout / festival thing. What it is depends on how many people are interested and sign up. We're in the early stages of planning it, but I can tell you what we know so far. It's going to be a mix of comedy and science communication and art, and a collection of all the eclectic individuals that listen to all of our podcasts. We'll do a live Here We Are there. I'll get some people from Duke to come out. If you want to hear more about it, even if you aren't a fan of, or you haven't heard of, you'd be a fan if you have heard it. But if you haven't heard Mind Under Matter, or you aren't a regular listener, check out the St. Patrick's Day episode where we talk all about it. It was inspired by International Mind Under Matter Day episode that we did. We had some people reach out to us and things just started falling into place. And we have this amazing place that is like, it does a big yurt retreat place with acres and acres, huge private lake, everything else. Incredible opportunity came up, and we pretty much get to make it whatever we want. It can be anywhere from a 50-person camp out, an intimate way to meet Ramin and I and other listeners of our shows, to which already looks like we're going to be doing something bigger than that, but scaling up to as many. There's room for 1,000 people could come and camp out. It's going to be a thing where you're allowed to, where you're able to camp out. It'll be a 3-day event, Friday through Sunday, where you can stay till Monday if you want. You don't have to stay all of the days. There's going to be a special thing on Thursday. A special bonus option potentially. So maybe mark your calendar for September 8th through 12th. Go to mindunderpod.com. You'll see a festival tab right on the top where you can go and enter your email for more details being sent out soon. But it's just going to be a really fun, cool way to meet a bunch of like-minded people and listeners of the show. We're going to do some live recordings there. There's an enormous, awesome stage with tons of seating. There's a frisbee golf course there. There's going to be paddle boarding, all sorts of amazing stuff. We have the whole place to ourselves. It's just can't believe the luck. It's going to be really affordable. And if you don't want to camp there, which you'll be able to bring your stuff and camp for free, we're just going to have a ticket price, but we're also going to have probably a yurt company or a glamping company come and set up like glamorous camping for those that want to pay a little extra and are maybe flying in or whatever else. And also, it just happens to be this enormous property 20 minutes from downtown Raleigh. So you could stay at a hotel, Airbnb, whatever else, if camping doesn't suit you. But we're going to do live podcasts during the day and a bunch of fun activities, and then music at night, and really putting an emphasis on, we have a ton of artists in our community, especially on Mind Under Matter. So we're going to have a bunch of people from the community out there live painting and doing all sorts of cool stuff like that. So you might want to check out those episodes, even if you don't regularly listen to Mind Under Matter, the St. Patrick's Day one that just came out, where we discuss some of the early bits of it, and we've been expanding as the show goes on. But it's something that we'll be able to build together and scale up. We already it's a place that already does some smaller festivals too, so we can easily scale up and add various things as interest is there. We may also do a Mind Under Matter tour during that time, a little run around the Southeast. In fact, I shouldn't say that I guarantee we will, because we're still sorting out some details. But the camp out / festival is definitely happening, and most likely we're going to do like a little 8-city, 10-city tour of Mind Under Matter at that time. So I know people have been wondering, when are you going to tour? When are you going to do live shows? This is even better than that. Not only will you get to come and see, and we'll do some stand up, and you'll get to see this and our other podcasts live, and get to meet various guests and scientists and stuff. You'll get to meet us, you'll get to meet other people in the community, but you'll also just get to hang out, have fun. I picked I pretty much got my pick of pretty much any time of year that I wanted to put this together, and I picked the time that was the furthest out that the weather would still be ideal. So it's warm enough to still get in the water at that time, and not so hot that it's uncomfortable to sleep at night. There's facilities there. There's kitchens that can be used. It's imagine taking over just like a very, very upscale campground or something, and then take that idea and add a little more to it, because it's better than just some upscale campground. I've done a lot of camping in my life. It's a dream location, and I've been talking with people that do similar things for a while, and talking with people that run various other festivals and stuff, and everyone's pumped about it, and we're getting it all together and can't wait to continue to plan. So once again, mindunderpod.com. Go to the festival tab and check that out. Extra long intro today because I'm so excited to tell you all about this, but I'm also excited for you guys to hear this episode. It's a real good one. Enjoy.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. Today, I have a return guest coming to you from NYU. He did stand-up science. He was on Here We Are in 2019. Also did stand-up science in a venue that no longer exists, the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, one of the finest.
Pre-pandemic, right?
That was before the pandemic. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Am I not supposed to be talking at the beginning?
Yeah, no, you can talk. No, this is fine. Itai Yanai, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Shane. So glad to be here.
I had to have Itai remind me. My listeners are really used to how bad I am at pronouncing names. It's like a running joke on the show, but for listeners, I had to have Itai remind me how to pronounce his name. And then he's like, it rhymes. and then what did you say? You asked your parents?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's like a good tip to tell people it rhymes, and they can remember how to pronounce my name. But then, I asked my parents, did you know that when you were calling me Itai, that it rhymes with Yanai? And they're like, huh. Oh no, we never noticed that.
Never noticed. That's absolutely incredible. Were you the first child, or were you like?
I was I was the first. I was the center of their attention. But I think what I was imagining happening was that, you're in a maternity ward. There's a lot going on. A little detail like that can escape you.
Yeah, I guess so. So why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners? Give them a bit of your background and what you do. Let's just go ahead and presume either people didn't hear the episode 3 years ago, or it's been 3 years and they've forgotten. So
sure. Okay, so like you said, I'm a professor at NYU. I do research on gene regulation, how genes come on and off, and we're doing that in the context of cancer biology, but also bacterial infections. We're using the latest and greatest tools, some of which we've helped to develop. And it's kind of like this great adventure because it involves computational biology, experimental biology, systems, everything that we can marshal to understand gene expression we use. That's my research. I'm originally from Israel, and I've been in New York City for almost 6 years, and it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. I don't even remember what all we talked about last time, but could you give people a little bit? We don't talk a ton about genetics on the show, not nearly as much as we should, mostly because I took a genetics course online once and it was fascinating and I loved it. And I was also like, wow, genetics is hard.
Yeah.
And there's a lot going on. So we haven't done tons of 101 stuff on this show.
I would love to do a 101. And you know what? It gets to the core of what got me interested in genetics. And that is a book that's become notorious for some people, famous for other people. It's called The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. And I read it right as I was finishing undergrad. I was about to get my degree in engineering and also in philosophy. And I was debating what to do, engineering or philosophy, what should be my future. And then I read this book and it totally changed my direction. I was like, this is what I want to study. And the reason was because I was just so fascinated by, I remember when I was in undergrad, what would constantly keep me awake at night and what troubled me so much was that we all just walk around through this world as though it's the most natural thing, right? Like we're just like, yeah, we know what we're doing. When you think about it, what is going on here? Like seriously,
that's what I ask myself every day.
Right? Like what? Seriously, why are we here? What is it? And I was, when you're an undergrad, you're in this phase where you're like trying to explore the world, and that's the best part about undergrad. And no one could give me an answer about what is going on. I just wanted to know. And here was a book. The Selfish Gene was a book that just told you what's going on, and it told it to you with like the most lucid manner. And it was just so. As soon as you read it, you're like, "Oh my God, this has to be true."
Yeah.
And I bought into it completely. I have to say, I reread that book recently, and it's still awesome. There's not a single mistake that I can find in it. The logic is impeccable. And okay, so what is that logic? The logic is like, why are we here? This is the world that genes built. Mm-hmm. That's why genetics should be like the most interesting thing for people, because it tells us why we're here. And we're here because the genes are replicating, and they are here because they have survived. It sounds like a tautology, but it's really not. And they're constantly evolving new mechanisms of surviving. And lo and behold, one amazing mechanism for these replicators surviving is us. We're just here to make babies, as some of us might have already figured out even without reading The Selfish Gene.
Yeah.
But The Selfish Gene really tells you the logic. And of course, it's not that Richard Dawkins discovered this. It's more that he's explaining what Charles Darwin first put forth, and that's what got me into genetics.
I mean, Darwin didn't have access to near the amount of information because it was, I mean, that was like before Mendel and everything. So that was right.
Yeah.
So he didn't have access to kind of the nitty gritty of the mechanisms that Dawkins did when he was able to, which that book is absolutely fantastic, by the way.
It is.
Yeah.
You say Darwin was before Mendel. What's interesting about that is that they were actually contemporaries. And it was found in Darwin's papers that he actually had Mendel's paper on his desk. Or maybe I'm exaggerating. It wasn't on his desk, but it was in his library. I can't remember. But he had it. He just, together with the entire scientific community of his time, ignored it. Everybody ignored it, even though it held the secret to one of the biggest problems of Darwin's ideas.
Right. But I guess I should say he wasn't accessing those. He wasn't accessing. That would have explained a lot for him.
So Shane, you read The Selfish Gene. What did you think about it?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, I read. I also read.
Blind Watchmaker.
No, something
God Delusion.
The Magic of Reality. Is really good because
that was great with the myths.
That goes back through like it was really kind of impactful. I think that was one that made me think about evolution in terms of just the universe as well, in terms of like right from the moment of the Big Bang and afterwards there was stable and unstable elements, and there's not anything necessarily like better or worse about being an unstable element. It's just we happen to be here because stable elements are the ones that stuck around and made the fabric of reality that we're familiar with. And so to think about evolution as a process that happens not just in terms of the bits of life on planet Earth was something that was impactful for me as well. And then but yeah, he has a funny sense of humor. You know, he got snarkier over time, I think, because he got attacked so much by so many people that he got a little dug in. But he always had like a pretty good sense of humor, especially for a period of time in my life that I was a little more into. That I felt like Dawkins never hit on the utility, the evolved emergent utility of religion, like he potentially could have explored.
I know what you mean. I think he does get it. It's just that he kind of I think he has a bone to pick with the way some religions get like a free ride. I don't know, like they don't have to pay taxes and other organizations do. And I think also my kind of impression of Dawkins, and I had a meeting with him. It was interesting, but I think he genuinely wants people to get it. Like he really wants people to understand, guys, this is why we're here. Like he's kind of a missionary in that sense, but I think it comes from a good place.
I think so too. I will say I remember trying to read. I need to take another crack at the extended phenotype because when I started reading it, I don't know, 8 years ago or something like that. I think I was in Australia. I was like drinking a fair amount at the time and I remember like being at a cafe with wine, trying to read the extended phenotype and getting to places where I'm like, wait, what's happening? And getting a little lost in the complexity.
I love that book. I think that book, because some people will say, well, you know, maybe someone is talking to Richard and they're saying, you know, Richard, what does it matter if you're thinking about it from the gene's point of view, that the genes want to survive, or you're looking at it inversely from the organism point of view, and then the organism just has some genes and it uses the genes to reproduce, but it's really individual centric. And with the extended phenotype, he shows, no, it's not a semantic argument that we're making here. It really does matter. You really do get to explain things that you wouldn't be able to explain otherwise if you look at it from the genes point of view. And so I thought that was a great argument, but most people found it kind of a tough reading. And I think even though
Dawkins it seemed useful. There's some books like that. You ever read a book that like you start kind of giving up on, and then you're walking around, and like 2 weeks later some things start clicking into place,
right?
And then you're like, I gotta go back. Like the book Chaos.
By Gleek, James Gleek.
Yeah, it was a little bit like that for me, where there'd be parts where I'm like, why am I even reading this? I'm like getting frustrated. And then I would be out walking on a beach or something and be like, oh, now I get it. And then I would go back to it.
True. Yeah, maybe it's a reflection of how deep the book is, that you read a little bit and then it has to like kind of sink in. And then what you're referring to is probably like your subconscious coming back and saying, we've thought about it in the background while you've been doing things, and we want to let you know we think that book is actually onto something.
Yeah. I gotta fill more of my background stuff with things like that. Can you explain to me the idea of the extended phenotype and what that term means?
Yeah. So he says that we often think about the genes influencing how the organism is built, right? And that's why some might think, well, you could just look at it inversely, that the organism has some genes. But he says, no. These genes, these replicators, if you think about it, they don't have to observe a boundary between the individual and the environment. The genes, they can actually extend their phenotype. They can influence not just what the organism is doing, but beyond it. So he gives this example. This is crazy. Well, he gives a number of crazy examples. One is, let's say we're talking about beavers and the way beavers build a dam. So, the beaver has genes, and the genes have built the beaver, the animal. But because the beaver is also building a dam, and because that behavior of building the dam is under genetic control, you can think about it so that there could be a mutation in one of the genes of the beaver. And because of that mutation, that beaver is now building a dam that's of a slightly different architecture. So now you've got like a gene for the architecture of this dam. And maybe there's like two alleles in the population of beavers, and they're sort of fighting it out, like natural selection, which allele is better, which architecture is better. So here's a gene. It happens to be in a beaver, but it's exerting an effect on a whole lake and what the dam situation is for that lake. So the way to think about the architecture of the dam is that it's an extended phenotype. It's under genetic control of genes that just happen to be in a beaver. And and then he talks about like host pathogen interactions, where sometimes there's like a I forget the name of the pathogen, but it goes into a bird and it will go into the brain of the bird. So now you've got a pathogen in the brain of the bird, and it's actually like pulling the strings. And as the bird is flying, the pathogen is controlling in which direction the bird flies. So it's as though the pathogen has genes for controlling the behavior of the bird. And so the flight pattern of the bird is the extended phenotype of the genes that are in the pathogen. And so you only, and then this makes sense only if you have a gene-centered point of view. There's no way to explain everything that we've just said about the beavers and the pathogen if you're looking at it from the organism's point of view. And only if you're looking at it from the gene's point of view. That's Dawkins' big argument, is that you need to think about life as replication by genes, and the individual is just being a kind of survival machine. He calls it like an agent of replication.
Yeah, I'm curious what your take is, because as someone that's I'm a big believer in the selfish gene point of view. I'm sure a lot of my listeners, this and especially my Mind Under Matter podcast, where I'm not talking with a guest and just trying to get everything out of my head that I know. I have a selfish gene point of view, but there was I'm curious what you think about. I know group selection pretty much completely went away for a long period of time, and I feel like it's starting to bubble up a little bit again in terms of, again, I don't know if it's like a semantic kind of idea that we're talking about, or do you have any thoughts about?
I recently read this book called The Gene's Eye View of Evolution, and it's a really good summary of the whole 40-year history of science since the publication of The Selfish Gene. And I think there are so many misunderstandings that have occurred. Stephen Jay Gould was like a big sort of a great popularizer of science, and he was definitely on our side against the creationists, so that was good. But he actually obfuscated and confused a lot of things and made things murky. I actually don't know of any like real difficulty with the selfish gene model.
Right.
I don't know of nothing real. I think, one way to think about it though is that there could be this difference between genes and genomes. So like what a genome is a collection of genes that have decided to come together and cooperate. And so cooperation is a big theme in evolution, as much as competition is. We always highlight competition, like survival of the fittest, nature red in tooth and claw, right? We highlight the bloody side of evolution, but wherever you look, there's actually extraordinary cooperation. And somehow sometimes it gets missed because it's a little like too obvious. Like sometimes, when something is too obvious, you don't see it. It becomes invisible to you. It's like, that story about two fish are swimming, two young fish, I guess, are swimming. And then an older fish passes them and says, "Hi boys, how's the water?" and then as they fly, as they swim away, one fish says to the other, "What's water?"
Right.
So I think that's like what the genome is in biology. Like we say what genome? We take it as obvious that the organism should have a genome. But if you think about it, a genome is a huge testament to cooperation. Like these genes are tying their fate together. And so because of this notion of cooperation, I think issues like group selection come in, and really I think it's just like a special case because there are also viruses that have much fewer genes, and in bacteria we also have horizontal gene transfer. So I think the general model is the selfish gene model. Right. There could be like little exceptions that give credence to the other models.
Yeah, there's just like weird. There's like what was the one I was trying to articulate the other day? I think it was clownfish that I saw where they have they have what looks like, this is always misleading when you watch like a nature program, and it kind of what it looks like and what's actually happening isn't always represented in the right way. But clownfish, because they have they're not the only fish to change gender for whatever reason. It'll be like a bunch of females, and then one will become the male, and there'll be one male in this little bit of territory that they have. But they have a way of because of the way that they replicate, it seems to keep their population numbers under control. And that just seems like the most counterintuitive. Like I can't think of another species that has anything that resembles like a self-regulating population
Ah,
mechanism, and so once in a while I see things like that, and then because I've talked with a couple people that are like, group selection is like starting to bubble up again in like peculiar ways. I don't know enough about it. I come from a selfish gene point of view myself, so. But
well, no, I mean, there are a lot of mechanisms like that. So yeast do what you just mentioned as well. I had a professor who would say that a great way to think about sex in yeast is that a yeast cell will come into the bar, look around, see if there are more of this sex than of that sex, and then they decide what they're going to be tonight.
that's funny.
So there are a lot of mechanisms. For example, meiosis, which is like how we pass on genes from our generation to the next generation. That kind of, if you portray it in some light, it could seem as though that the genes have a kind of ultimate fairness, but it's not. It ultimately, it's an illusion. In my perspective, it ultimately boils down to a selfish gene model.
And what about, I was wondering if maybe you could comment on, as we talk about the genome and cooperation, one thing that's interesting to me is that something will kind of get selected for through maybe it increases the ability to survive or replicate or whatever, but then there's other genes really close to it that just kind of hitchhike.
Right.
What's the name of that process when genes just kind of get lucky?
Hitchhiking.
Hitchhiking.
Yeah, exactly. Right, because the genome has an address, right? For every gene is a particular location.
Yeah.
And so if there's a gene that's right next to it, or even like one letter in that gene is like a mutation that just happened, it could get swept also to fixation. So that means that it's just one allele, and now it's the majority within the population. Yeah, so there are a lot of ways that alleles can hitchhike on selection for other alleles.
I think I was trying to recall one, and I think I said turkey gizzard, but I meant turkey snoods, the weird flappy thing on turkeys over their noses. I guess.
Oh,
I had,
that's what that's called. I never knew what that's called. A snood?
Yeah, it's a cute name. And I guess females prefer it, and they kind of looked at the genes.
Sexual selection.
There's sexual selection going on, but what's sexy about that? And I think that there's a hitchhiker effect going on where the gene for the snoot is actually really close by something that's really beneficial for its immune system. So, so anyways, it's a lot of, maybe you could explain a little bit of, because I think we spend a fair amount of time talking about bigger picture stuff of natural and sexual selection on here, but little nuanced things that a lot of people don't know about are like kind of genetic drift and just evolutionary processes that happen. That there's change that happens that isn't always necessarily like every little change isn't beneficial for survival or replication. It's just usually that's sort of what wins out in the end, but that's not kind of every little step along the way.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about it. So let's start with like a concrete example. Let's say we wanted to study a disease. We have a disease for, I don't know, like congenital heart disease. Mm-hmm. Okay. And we wanted to see what is the gene responsible for that. So what you could think about doing is, let's take 100 people that don't have it. And then let's take 100 people that do have it. And we'll just sequence their genomes and we'll just see what's different, right? So it just sounds so straightforward, right? If there's a mutation that causes it, it should be present here and absent there. And we do that. We do that a lot. It's called a genome-wide association study, or a GWAS for the aficionados. That's the acronym. The problem is, when you do that, you see that there are millions of differences, right? So if you, for example, would just take your genome and compare it to I said your genome and pointed to me, your genome and compare it to my genome, you won't just get the gene responsible for your, would you say you're blonde or reddish?
I found out that my beard is red, and people would be, I always thought I was blonde, and my whole life, or as I got older, people are like, oh, you're kind of a redhead. And I was like, no, I am not. I was in real redhead denial. And
does the beard match the hair?
Yeah, okay, but summertime I lighten up a little bit. But yeah, I know what you're going.
Okay, so you might say the only difference would be that you're a redhead. I'm obviously not. You might think, oh, there'd just be like 2 or 3 differences. No, there's going to be, so you and I are 99.9% identical, but because our genome is 6 billion letters long, that 1 in 1,000 change is 6 million. So if you would compare your genome to my genome, there would be 6 million differences. And, maybe having being a redhead is one of those differences, but what about the 5,999,999 other changes? And to your point, most of those would be of no consequence. Like if you see an A where I have a T, it would be of no consequence. And that's what happens is that there's mutations happening all the time. And if that mutation does not exert any kind of phenotypic effect on the world, then it's subject to the whims of chance. It just comes and it goes. It could actually go to fixation, which means that over time it will actually just be by dumb luck, or maybe like what you were talking about before. If it's close to a gene that is under selection, it could get a free ride. It could hitchhike. But yeah, so most of the changes are actually not under natural selection, which is amazing. But it makes it difficult to now understand the genome. And I could actually tell you a really interesting story about how one change in our genome did make a huge difference about how we lost our tail. Did I tell you?
I don't know this one. I don't think so.
So this is a project that's being done in my lab, and it's led by a grad student called Bo Xia. And Bo, listen to this story. You're gonna flip out. So he takes an Uber ride, but he's in the Uber, but he's a grad student. He doesn't have a lot of money, so he kind of tried to save a few bucks, and he got Uber Pool, right? So he's in the Uber, and then the Uber stops and like some dude comes in. So Bo has to move over. But I guess the whole thing happened kind of fast. So he moves over and he sits on the buckle, right? Have you ever done that? You sit on the buckle and your tailbone kind of hurts. So he really hurt his tailbone. Yeah, I mean, he was really hurting. And most people would just kind of like suffer in silence. But Bo's amazing. So what he did is he started like becoming like really obsessive about like, why does his tailbone hurt so much? And that made him think like, actually, why don't we really have a tail? All these other monkeys have a tail, not all of them, but like you've gone to the zoo, you've seen monkeys with tail. Why did we lose our tail?
If a genie appeared to me today and was like, you can have a tail, yes or no, I'd be like, yeah, tail me.
Hell yeah, right?
You can hang from it and everything. I mean, not many species get to hang from it, but if I get a hanger tail, I'm taking it.
Well, also in these pandemic days, how you're constantly like holding the coffee, putting your mask on, if the logistics, right? Imagine if you had a tail now, it's like a whole other world of like.
I haven't put enough thought into all the things I would do with my tail. Oh,
so
man.
much.
So much.
Yeah. So, I mean, this whole story is about how we got robbed of a tail. And so listen to this. He goes to, there's no experiments. He figures it all out with no experiments in just 5 minutes. He goes to the Genome browser. This is a website where you can look at the gene sequence, but more importantly, you could look at it sort of annotated in many different ways. So one of the annotations is you just see what's going on in other genomes. So you can see, okay, this is your genome sequence. And then, I mean, not yours, like humanity's, the human genome. And then below it's like chimpanzee, and then, I don't know, bonobos and macaque and all the primates, right? You can even go further, like mice and chickens, whatever. So he went to this gene that's sort of known to control tail development. So developmental biologists, they've worked for a long time. They know like what the usual suspects are. They know like these 10 genes, they're the ones that control tail development. So he goes to one of them and he just sees that there's this thing called the ALU element. An ALU element, we could talk about it later if you want. It's a selfish, it's like what's called like ultra selfish. This thing is like, there's a million ALU copies in each human genome. And they're not doing anything functional really, except just copy pasting themselves back in. So they're just like freeloading off of our genome. In fact, freeloading is like the dominant story of the human genome. So much selfishness is happening within the human genome. Anyway, so
I feel like a living extended phenotype of the freeloaders.
Yeah, you're just like a sideshow. Like on the main stage is just like a million of these ALUs just like going around. And ALUs is just even not the whole story. There's so many other mobile retrotranspose, so many of these. Anyway, so one of them is in our human genome, and it's also in all of the primates that don't have a tail. So, a chimpanzee, a gorilla, they also don't have a tail. And all of us have this ALU right at this particular place. And all the primates that do have a tail are missing this ALU. So the thing is, that happens many times when there's a pattern like this. What was special about this, that only Bo saw what made it amazing and was crazy, is that he kind of he looked at it and he made this mental model of what's happening, which is he saw that it could hybridize with another ALU element on the other side of an exon, which is like a portion that codes for a gene, and that would lead to this thing called alternative splicing, which would like change the meaning of the protein. So he just looks at it, he gets like whoosh, he gets like something interesting could be happening here. And he convinced me that it's awesome. Actually, I didn't need much convincing. It just sounded so cool. And we made a mouse. We made him, now you can just like take a mouse, like move stuff around, make a designer mouse. So we made a mouse that simulates the effect of this ALU, and the mouse lost the tail. So now we can just, and so now it just really looks like that was the mutation that happened 25 million years ago. Like we can look at our genome now, we can be like, oh, because of this thing, we lost our tail 25 million years ago. And so the natural question is, if you take it out, can you get your tail back?
That's what I want to know. I want a tail baby. I never wanted kids until this very moment. Now I'm like, I kind of want a tail baby.
Well, it's so funny that because, in many cultures, tails were considered, like every once in a while, a human baby is born with a tail.
Yeah.
And it's always like considered like really shameful, as though the baby did something wrong or something. And if you read this book, 100 Years of Solitude, did you hear this? This is like part of my favorite fiction book. So I told you about my favorite non-fiction book, The Selfish Gene. My favorite fiction book is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And there, the whole sort of story revolves around kids being born with tails. Well, I'm exaggerating, but it does figure in there. But the thing is, because it happened 25 million years ago, our guess is that even if we were to, which of course we wouldn't, but let's say that alu element popped out just by chance, we think, just our speculation, we haven't of course done this human experiment, we think it still would not be enough to bring the tail back, because 25 million years is a long time. Probably a lot of genetic changes have built on top of it and now kind of have locked in this tailless state.
Well, you built up all my hope and then you just ruined it.
I just crushed your dreams. I know. No, it would be cool to have a tail, I have to admit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like what's that odd oh shoot, what's the name of it? There's some hair condition where people are hairy all over their face.
Yeah.
I interviewed someone that wrote a whole book about it, but that's not what I interviewed her about, so I don't remember any details. Anyway, there's just like odd things like that with one little change and you can have a hairy face.
Right. Because it's so cool because you would think that, okay, we got like 20,000 genes. So maybe I have like one gene for this portion of my face, one gene for this portion, but it doesn't work like that. The genome is actually, one way to think about it is that there are workers and there are managers. Mm-hmm. And if you disrupt the activity of a manager, then like everything underneath kind of falls apart too. So that's like, you could just like with one small change, you could actually make a big difference because you didn't change a tiny thing, but sometimes we call it a master regulator.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
I've been speaking of weird evolutionary things that may or may not actually have utility for either survival or replicating. I've been thinking about that a little bit with I should look into the evolution of beards, because having this thing is, especially, so I trim my mustache a lot, but I didn't in the beginning and I just let it go and it's like getting in my mouth, and it was absolutely disgusting. I just had someone write me that they said they were upset that I said big mustaches are disgusting, but I stand by it. I lived it. And they were half kidding, I hope. But that's, I mean, if you think about what the utility of a beard could be, it's like, well, it can't be warmth, because why wouldn't females have it as well? If they're like, usually females have the utility on lockdown in most species, and like, is it a sexually, like, I find it like you could advertise like grooming skills with it or something like that. I don't know. It's like you would think
you could demonstrate to your mate, look, I could groom like this. I could make a nice shape out of that.
It's so weird because it's like it's stuff gets in it. You would think that it would lead to more disease, or just wouldn't smell great or whatever else before there was like regular sanitation and showers and things like that. And it's to think about it, like it, I mean, in a fight, it's not really blocking a punch very well for me. I don't think that has anything to do with it. Could be testosterone is like anti-immunal and
I heard two theories. One is, like you said, sexual selection, and it could be that males have selected women that have less less facial hair. But another theory is that, and vice versa. And another theory is that the role of communication plays such a dominant role in our society. Like, we communicate more. And what we're mostly trying to do when we're communicating is we're trying to read each other's minds. Like right now, I'm trying to think, what is Shane going to ask next? Like, what is Shane thinking? I'm trying to read your mind. And
I'm trying to read I can't wait to hear where you're going with this.
No, well, I just think if a person has less facial hair than, or like generally less hairy, then I can better read their mind. And so, and of course, evolution is not about what I can do. Evolution is about the genes. And so maybe a gene can survive better in a kind of population where people are communicating better. So that's one notion that to improve our brain reading of each other's minds, it's better if we have less facial hair. But I mean, there's a lot of trouble with that because like chimpanzees, they communicate a lot too. Why do they have more facial hair?
And why is it so long? Even if it's like a facial hair thing, like why would it? I mean, this is like you could pull on it. This is, if anything, it's a danger in a fight.
I think you've given this a lot of thought.
It's also, men seem to like my beard more than ladies do. You know, it's more of like it might be like a status thing or something like that more than because humans got a lot more going on than just.
I could tell. I mean, no, I definitely understand. You know, when I think about like John Lennon, right? Like what if I ask you, imagine the John Lennon of all the periods of John Lennon where he was like the most kind of childlike versus imagine the John Lennon where he was most like philosophical, you know, like this, you know, commenter of society. Of course, the latter you imagine like with that cool beard, wearing the "I Love New York" T-shirt, and the Beatlemania. That's more beardless John.
That's interesting, huh? I thought maybe it was because there's some speculation that like strong jawlines are advertising inability to take the hit of testosterone, and the testosterone being potentially not great for the immune system in high doses. And so if you have a stronger immune system, maybe you can release more testosterone at a certain age. But then, and maybe that's why men die younger too, which made me think like, well, this is if I'm trying to sell myself, if I'm like to a sperm bank or something, I think this is advertising that I have enough testosterone to signal a good immune system, but then but the hair on the top still too, so not so much testosterone that it's overly hard on an immune system.
Oh yeah, you've got like a Goldilocks level of testosterone.
Yeah, that's what I try to tell people. Yeah,
that's what you're trying to project.
Yeah. What do you think about in related territory? What do you think about like spandrels in genetics? Could you explain that idea? And are you fond of it? And the idea of some things that look like they might be significant, like since we're talking about like maybe this beard could be, or say, you know, if there's like the way a chin is shaped, we might, through the lens of trying to find the utility and everything, or the sexiness and everything, we might be like, oh, there has to be a reason that chin has the particular shape, but it's maybe just the inevitable outcome of like being predators with two eyes facing forward and having a face shape like this and neck and blah, blah, blah. It's other things going on there. And the chin is like this kind of decorative, ornamental outcome of two other things with utility kind of coming together.
No, exactly. I mean, you explain it perfectly. I think it's there's this adaptationist program to take everything we see and say, okay, what is it for? What is something for? And it used to be that there's two, not just used to be, it still is, like a good starting point for explaining anything, in my mind, is chance and necessity. Those are the two if someone asks you, why is something the way it is? So one reason is it has to be that way. Like it was selected for that. It's really doing something important. And the other is it's just chance. Now we've been talking a lot about chance. So that's good that it's getting another mention here. What Stephen Jay Gould was talking about when he mentioned spandrels, his notion was that a related concept is constraints. A lot of time, something is because it's more complicated. I'll give you an example. Male nipples. Why do you and I have nipples? Someone could say, well, you have a nipple. Then there has to be a reason why you have a nipple. Why would the body go to the trouble of making you a nipple for no reason? There has to be a reason. So what Gould would say, I think, I'm putting words into his mouth. He passed away, I think, in 2006, so he can't answer you himself right now. What he would say is that there are constraints on how things have to be done. So, we all know that the nipples of the female are crucial for distributing the milk. And that's through the mammary glands, and we're called mammals because of this such an important thing. So in women, it's terribly important to have nipples, right? Mm-hmm. And it could just be that it's just so hardwired into creating a human body to create nipples that even though in the males they're not used, mm-hmm. they still have to be created. There's this constraint where you can't make this top part without putting nipples. You just can't do it. It's locked in. Mm. And so like if you, what Stephen Jay Gould would say, hey, if you're now going to construct this crazy story about males have nipples that ignores the fact that there's a constraint, then you're just leading yourself astray. You're just going to say, oh, you have nipples because, I don't know, they look good. It's fun to have. You're just fooling yourself. The explanation is that it's an ornament, like you said.
Yeah, it's so depressing that I don't get to have a tail, and at the same time, there's just no escaping nipples. And if you're a male that in high school years, you're probably going to find out in like a locker room or something sometime one of the downsides of having nipples.
But wouldn't it be ridiculous to say the function of having a nipple is to get efficiently bullied in high school?
Yeah. Well, isn't there's certain things that are useful in a given gender that then in the embryonic development there's some things that start developing before gender is determined, and some mm-hmm. things that happen after gender is determined. So we see a lot of like sexual dimorphism in a lot of males and females, but then sometimes there's also like a female bird will still have like a little bit of this blue spot that's no good for her, makes her stick out to predators. But it's just because that process started, that process of the embryonic development launched off in the cascades before the sex was determined, and those new cascades branched off into their various kind of programs, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, and it could be that you the developmental program now is sort of less flexible at some parts, less plastic, and mm-hmm. so it can't change. Another example is forelimbs in whales. So if you think about, hind limbs. So if you look at a whale, it doesn't have legs, of course, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have whales. But if you did an X-ray of a whale, if you went into its skeleton, it has little baby legs.
Yeah.
As in the skeleton, inside all that blubber or whatever, there are these little baby. And the reason is that you can't change the process to take out the legs. Even though you could say, well, what's the point of building the legs if you're not going to use them? And if you were to try to figure out what's the function of those legs, it's ridiculous. There's no function. It's a spandrel in the sense. It's like by constraint, it's still there.
Yeah, I often wonder how many evolutionary holdovers we have where they their utility is past, but they're just still with an example that I love using. There's some sea turtle that goes from it makes the long journey from the east coast or from the west coast of Africa to the east coast of South America to seemingly just to lay its eggs. And they're like, why in the world would you go so far and risk your life and everything else? And they look at the two regions, and they were actually basically touching during Pangea. And the idea is that like there was a river or whatever, and there was a advantage to going across and laying away from the river, where it'd be away from whatever predator or whatever at the time. And then each generation, it got the continents got like a yard further apart, and a little further you'd have to swim. But it was just once it was programmed in there, and now there's nothing to flip that preference for swimming that direction when it's mating season or whatever. And because you could potentially increase survival and offspring numbers and everything else a great deal if one of them be like, you know what, I'm just going to hang out here and lay my eggs instead of swimming.
It's crazy, yeah. And it really shows how having a historical perspective, like if you know the history of something, you know so much. Because if you just take this perspective where like, just give me the organism right now, I'm just going to study it the way it is, just looking at its biology, so many things won't make sense.
Yeah,
you know, the why is something the way it is. It kind of like requires you to know the history of it.
And the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking, in kind of speaking of chance, it was just we're recording this on Valentine's Day. I'm not sure when it's actually going out, but probably a few weeks from now or something. But anyhow, it was just Darwin Day, and so I was just reading the bits of Darwin stuff, and you know, reminded of the classic example of Darwin's finches, of the various beaks that are just a slightly different size for getting, you know, a little better at getting nuts on this one part of an island than in a slightly different environment. And it's sort of these kind of islands of speciation that happen when a species splits off into a couple groups and goes off and finds itself in a different environment. Those different environments are going to have different pressures that are going to eventually lead to different changes. But I was thinking about that when we were talking about kind of the like more neutral drift or whatever. I think you could theoretically run an experiment where you take a big group of a species and then create two islands that are identical in every way and split them up. And you would still see change. Given enough time, there would be some changes. They wouldn't remain identical forever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this experiment has sort of been done naturally, because a lot of times a new sort of river will flow through that it didn't flow before. Now it divides populations, and you can show that after a while, the sort of the lock no longer fits the key, you know, because they're changing, even though they're not adapting to anything new, they're just changing internally. There are new alleles coming in, and like we talked about before, the genome is a bunch of genes that are fighting it out. And the way Martin Lurcher, my collaborator on many things, and I like to think about it, is that it's a society of genes, and the society is evolving. And now, because you've split them up and there's two societies, after a while, they're going to be sort of speaking different languages, and they one individual from here will no longer be able to mate effectively, you know, producing offspring that are themselves, able to procreate because now and that's our definition of what a species is a population that can breed internally but not externally.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to I want to make sure that we get into a little bit of your podcast as well, because one of the reasons why I follow all of my past guests on Twitter and actually a lot of my guests aren't on Twitter at all, and some are more active than others, and I've been enjoying some of the thoughts that you've been sharing, but I also I saw that you started your own podcast, the Night Science podcast, and I especially enjoyed some of your tweets about that and about creativity and science and things, and I'm always trying to give more options for people to, they learn science in a number of different ways. And so, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about why you started that, some of the kind of general premise of it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Shane. And I have to say that I think some of it was motivated by just seeing how you are doing a podcast and all the work that you're doing with the stand-up science too. I think it's maybe kind of encouraged me to take a more active role in talking science with the general public too. So
that's great. Thank you.
So, okay, the Night Science. Okay, Martin and I, what we like to talk about is how there's, I don't know how it happened that we scientists forgot in some way this, or maybe Martin and I are wrong, but here's how we see science. We make this dichotomy, and perhaps it's a false dichotomy, perhaps it's more of a continuum, but we think it's really helpful to think about the way science is done as being comprised of two spheres of work. One part of science is just what we've been taught, which is you have a hypothesis for solving a particular problem. Let's do an experiment, right? Let's test the hypothesis. If there's evidence for it, then the hypothesis gets to survive that, and maybe we'll test it again. If it survives enough more tests, it will be elevated to a theory, which is the highest form of knowledge in science, a theory. But what the scientific method never talks about is, where did you get that theory? Where did you have that? Where did you get the hypothesis? Right? In many ways, think about like Einstein, the notion of relativity. Well, what an idea, right? Like the all of the creativity there was to get to the idea. Once you have the idea, now you can think about how to test it. Mm-hmm. So we're really distinguishing between two parts of science: getting the idea and then testing the idea. Getting the idea we call night science. Testing the idea we call day science. And I don't know how it happened. That's what I was starting out saying at the beginning. I don't know why science is in this particular state right now, but there's a huge dominance, a huge influence of day science. A lot of, we're always in, scientists are taught, even like you think about how science gets taught in high schools and middle schools, it's all really day science, right? We never get taught, how do you have an idea? No one teaches us the creative aspect. And there's no scientific method for how to have an idea. No one teaches us how to have an idea. So Martin and I just think it's crazy. And with the podcast, what we're doing is we're just bringing in scientists that have influenced our thinking, good scientists, and we just ask them, please tell us, how do you have your ideas? What is your process? We're really interested in the process of coming up with ideas. And it's so interesting, like what we're learning. I could tell you about one idea that actually has led us to do an experiment that kind of went viral on Twitter, which was fun. And it goes like this. So the notion is that you might think a hypothesis is great, right? It's all awesome. It's the best thing in the world to have a hypothesis. But what we try to ask is, maybe in some cases, having a hypothesis can actually be bad for you. Because if you have a hypothesis, what if you're so married to that hypothesis, you can't see anything else? You're just tied to it. You actually kind of like become blind to any alternative explanations. And so we did this experiment. You know the famous experiment of the invisible gorilla, where you show
you saw that? The listeners, pause right now if you don't know what we're talking about. Pause right now and just watch the video. I mean, it's kind
selective,
of
it's called selective attention.
Yeah,
Google selective attention.
It's already spoiled a little bit. Maybe I'll maybe put it. I'll maybe put it in the intro to watch ahead of time. Right. Yeah, right. Because it's a fun one. Gorilla, it's a classic, and they've expanded on it so many. There's been a lot of really fun iterations of it. But now go ahead and explain it to people.
Right. So you're asked to count the number of passes that students are making with the basketball. They're just like running around, throwing a basketball, and you have to count 1 pass, 2 pass, 3 pass. How many passes did they do in these 30 seconds or so? And the answer is 15 or whatever. But then they ask you, did you see the gorilla? And then they rewind and they show you that as you were counting, there was a person in a gorilla suit that walked around, got to the middle, pounded on their chest, and then walked the other side. And 50% of the people that watch this don't see the gorilla. So that's incredible. So we were just wondering, does the same thing happen in science? Like when you're doing an experiment, is there something that's analogous to a gorilla in your data and you're missing it because you're like so fixated on your hypothesis? Mm-hmm. So we designed this experiment where we take a class of students in computer science or learning statistics, and we give them a data set. And it's the same data set to both to all students, but we divide them into 2 groups. One group, we say, please just analyze this data set. And when we say, what is the data set? It's just 1,000 lines, because for every line, it's a person. And we have 2 numbers for each person. What is their BMI index, their body mass index? And how many steps did they take per day? Mm-hmm. So you might expect a person that walks around a lot, maybe they have a low BMI index. Mm-hmm. And if you're very inactive, maybe you have a high BMI index, something like that. So you could start to like develop a hypothesis. But to the first group, we said, just please take this data set. Tell us, what do you find in it? What do you conclude from it? Mm-hmm. The other group, we said, please take this data set, same data set. Here's how it's structured. Tell us, please, what do you find in this data set? But also, can you please tell us exactly what is the p-value? What is the significance of the relationship in these people of their BMI related to their number of steps per day? So this group, they had a concrete hypothesis that there's a relationship between how many steps you take and your BMI. These you were just asked to explore. Now, the data set is a trick data set where if you just plot it, X, Y, like BMI, number of steps per day, it's a picture of a gorilla waving at you. You know, like each person is a dot. and we were just wondering, who would see the gorilla? Because of course, it doesn't matter that it's a gorilla. The point is to see who would plot their data. Because to answer the question of what's the p-value, you don't have to plot the data, right? You could just it's just one line of code in the software. You just put it in, just like, what's the correlate? And then, that's it, you're done. So what we saw is that the students that didn't have a hypothesis, they were just told to explore the data set, they were 3 times more likely to discover the gorilla than the people who were hypothesis focused.
Wow.
So we concluded that a hypothesis can be a liability. You're liable to miss things. And this happens all the time, I think. So that there's this a night science exchange between what's the role of hypothesis, what's the role of exploration, and it's interesting to think about. I can give you another. Oh yeah, go on.
Well, so I mean, theoretically, if you wanted to improve upon the scientific process, wouldn't you have people running the experiments just give their data sets to a data analyst that has no idea the attachment or what they were after with the experiment or anything else, and just say, what do you see in this data? Is that a way to improve upon?
I see what you're saying. Well, it's a good idea, right? Just give it to someone objective and have them see. Well, you know what I think about? There's this story of Sherlock Holmes where, you ever read a Sherlock Holmes story where you're trying to figure out like who did it?
I've watched all of the Sherlock Holmes series. I don't read fiction. Actually, I only watch it.
Well, there's this one where the solution was to realize that there was a thief, right? They're trying to figure out who's the thief, but there was a dog. There was a dog in the house, and Sherlock Holmes picks up on the fact that the dog did not bark. He asked people, did anybody hear any barking? Nobody heard barking. And from that, Sherlock Holmes concluded that it must be that the thief, that the dog knows the thief. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the critical thing was to realize that something did not happen. The dog did not bark. And that's a lot of times what happens when you're analyzing real data, because usually it's not something so dramatic like a gorilla popping up. It's and that's why I think my point is going to be that you can't really outsource it to someone else, because you bring a lot to it. Like you bring your whole sort of history of everything to a data set, for better or worse. It's been shown actually that you give the same data set to many different people, each person will find something else. And they could be that they're all true, the things that the people find. It's just that you sort of, you say, oh, this, if you think about it, like these are macrophages, so they should be doing this, but they're not doing that. That's interesting. Whereas a more sort of inexperienced observer wouldn't pick up on that.
I see.
So I think that's why you can't really, you don't know what you're looking for. That's actually a real kind of like night science question. Like, how do you find something that you don't know if it's there, and if it is there, you don't know what it would look like. You're just trying to look for something interesting.
Yeah,
and that's like, to me, that's like the thing that draws me to science. I think I would have given up on science. I would have this life is so interesting. There's so many things to do in life. You could write poetry. You could explore Antarctica. You could so many cool things to do. Why just be a scientist your whole time? I ask myself that, especially since COVID. But I think I'm hooked on science because there's this thrill of discovery. There's this notion of what's in here, and you realize that it's really demanding. It's also really, really frustrating sometimes, because something's there, but you don't know what it is, or maybe it's not there. Maybe you're just imagining, and maybe you're fooling yourself. It's an intellectual adventure.
Yeah, I'm also curious. So I think the reason why chance has been on my mind quite a bit lately is because I still I have no official scientific training. I never went to college or anything, and so I've found that, especially since COVID, as I see people connecting a lot of dots that I know absolutely are not there, it just has me thinking so much about how many times I've done that. And I was kind of I was and recently I was kind of looking at the Darwin versus Wallace stuff, and it seemed like it just had me, and then learning about runaway selection pressures, and it had me thinking about like null hypothesis, like a null hypothesis more than I have in the past, of just thinking, because I make connections and I have ideas constantly. So I've been checking myself more, going, all right, how much am I digging in, and motivated reasoning, confirmation bias is taking over, finding what I want to find in things. I've never been trained to analyze data. And so I've been thinking, well, what if there's no connection? Like whenever I do have one of these great ideas, I'm like, but what if that's actually not a connection?
What if it's wrong? Well, first of all, I got to tell you, Shane, that if I was a person of consequence in a university, I would motion for you to get an honorary degree in biology, because just from this discussion alone, I can tell that you know a lot and deserve a degree.
Oh, I appreciate that.
But I think it's a fair question, and it's one that perhaps a lot of people, like perhaps scientists, we don't describe it as much as we should. And it goes like this: it's fair, especially in night science. It's the whole point of night science, is to create as many ideas as possible.
Right.
And you don't have to worry if they're right or wrong. You just have to think about if they're interesting and if they potentially could explain some things, if they're innovative, if they're exciting. And then all you have to do is then move it over to day science. Day science is the adult in the room. Day science is rigorous. Day science is the one we try to communicate to the anti-vaxxers, where we're trying to say, guys, look, it's not what you think. We have these clinical trials, these randomized controlled trials, like all that rigor, all that power of science, it all comes from day science. Thing is, day science would be nothing though if it didn't have good ideas. Day science can test an mRNA vaccine, but where did the idea come from to use mRNAs for a vaccine? Like that's a total night science idea and then you had to kind of develop it, and then when it's ready, you bring it for formal testing. So I think that's what I really like about science, and I think we don't communicate enough. I'll give you an example. Well, one thing that happened to me is when you talk to people sometimes, and teenagers, and you ask them, what do you want to do? And you kind of, you're biased because you want them to go into science. So you said, oh, how about biology? Would you want to go into biology? And they say, no, I don't want to go into biology because I want to do something creative. And I said, no, biology is so creative. Science is such a creative thing. We have to just kind of discuss more the night science creativity, while making sure that people don't get the wrong idea in thinking that makes science less robust. It's like the yin and yang, Yeah. It's a total duality where there's like a crazy process that generates ideas, but then there's like a really adult in the room kind of process that is doing like fact checking, testing.
Yeah. I love that. I guess I sometimes take my creativity for granted because it fuels much of my career and adult life and everything, and there's no adult in this room.
No adult in this room
whatsoever.
I often felt that myself.
and so often when I think about, I have a lot of ideas in the shower and things like that. And one thing that I've noted, I'm very much into perception and consciousness, and one of the things that I love thinking about is I kind of have this idea of why. So we were talking about some complicated book that your subconscious is mulling on for a while, and then gives you the bright idea. Oh, this connection, this is worthwhile. I often find myself thinking about what is the criteria of expression that when does the subconscious decide now it's ready? Because you'll have an idea. This happens in comedy a lot or whatever. You have like, I'll have a joke idea and I'll be like, whatever, and I put it away. I often compare it to, I don't even bother writing it down. It's such a bad idea.
Oh, big mistake. You have to write it down. Oh, that's what I wanted to ask you. Do you write it down?
I do often, but some of them is just like, way too many ideas. I need organizational adulting a lot more than anything else. But the point is I'll compare it to like, just this like kind of, this idea is not going to work for me. There's nothing there. And then a month later, it'll pop back into my head in the shower, and it's evolved a little bit. And maybe the situation in my life is different, or I've had other ideas since, and now there's a perfect place for it. And now it went into my, it popped up the first time, just this kind of like degenerative idea that won't do anything for me. And then a month late, hadn't thought about it since. And a month later, it pops back into my consciousness with wearing a top hat and suit and ready to work for me. And
it's ready.
And I often think about, well, first of all, what the heck was that idea doing down there, living that life that whole time? But then I often think about what were the conditions that my subconscious decided that was the time that it was ready to be pulled out of the oven. The reason I bring all of this up is because I wonder in our discussion how much, if there's so much put on day science, how many amazing ideas never even end up popping into your consciousness because they're popping into a world constrained by needing a certain amount of grant money for something to happen. And
totally. Totally. No, that's the thing that we're really trying to rebel against, where it seems as though the whole kind of scientific establishment is just kind of locked into day science mode. And what we say is that you could have like a meeting where you want to generate an idea, and you just like a brainstorming meeting, and then nothing will come of it. And that might sound to people like it was a waste of time, but I don't think it is. And I think that I would still do 100 of those meetings, because I think in one of those, there's going to be a great idea born. Mm-hmm. And that idea is what I live for. I want that idea.
Yeah.
I'm willing to suffer all the boring meetings, the ones that fail. I don't care.
I say this all the time.
You need them. Oh, it's the same in comedy?
Well, I often call myself an epiphany chaser, and just that that's the number one feeling in the world to me, and I will suffer through a great deal of boring, books that I'm not overly interested in, and things
because
like
there could
that.
Be a nugget of gold somewhere, right? Yeah. And the thing is, though, let's say a scientist is constrained by all this grant writing and all this paper writing, all this other paperwork and all the realities, and something needs to give. So you have to cancel something. It's always these brainstorming sessions that are the first to go. You say, "Oh, sorry, I can't do this," and you cancel that. But it's a shame, because that's the future. That's the future of your research, is those ideas. And I was, but going back to what you were saying, I thought it was really interesting because I constantly have this feeling that if I don't write something down, the minute I think it's going to be lost forever. Nah. And now you give me hope. You give me hope. You're kind of saying, no, there's like a natural selection of ideas in your brain. If it's good, it will bubble back up.
I mean, it's a mix. When I started comedy, I always thought, if you don't write it down, you're just throwing money in the street. What a waste.
That's not true.
Maybe I've gotten lazier or more interested in other things. I'm certainly less passionate about comedy than I was when I started. I'm far more interested in. I find myself writing down more serious philosophical ideas and just insights than I do jokes, and some of them happen to be funny, and those are the ones that I'll then like dig into and explore a little bit more. But yeah,
you remind me, and I think I tweeted this because you were referring to my tweets, that I think there's a lot of connection between comedy and night science, in the sense that sometimes when you have a good idea, one thing that tends to happen is you start laughing. Like you're just like, oh my God. Like it's as though the idea is so unexpected. It's like a punchline, right? It's like someone just like you're like so fixated on it being one way. And then you see the gorilla, for example, like you're just like, what? It's actually this. And the first response is just laughing.
Yeah. People are often confused about why I kind of like abandoned a traditional comedy path to start mixing science in and doing shows like Stand Up Science, like you participated in. Yeah. And I often tell people that I just find so many connections between science and comedy, and also along the way I got kind of known for some psychedelic communication as well. But
that stuff is awesome.
But I also I think the same thing about all three things. I have more mixed ideas about psychedelics than I used to. I think it gets a little far into night science sometimes, but generally, I think it needs a little more day science in there. I was usually like the skeptic that would have all these experiences, but still want to like test them and figure out why they're but anyhow, all three of those subjects, there's the kind of alien anthropologist thing happening where you're popping out of yourself in some way. You can't ever do it perfectly, but comedians and scientists, for example, are trying to have novel insights about the things that everyone else is just walking past. They're not even noticing. It's just a regular part of their day. And so, a lot of comedy is like, you ever notice this and that thing? And be like, oh my gosh, I did notice it. Yeah, door handles are crazy like that, or whatever. Whatever like normally boring thing that you have a new insight about, and science often does, especially in night science.
Yeah, comedians are always like, oh, what is it about cats or
yeah. It drives me crazy when they don't just Google. Like, I have that insight and then I look deeply into it. Some comedians are out there. I'm like, no, there's an answer for that. I've often thought, like, do I tell the comic that there's a real answer to that, or do I just let them have the joke and be at peace?
But in a sense, the joke, it's more funny if you don't know. Invent something silly.
But it's a big part of why I wanted you to come on the show. I'm glad that we had such a terrific chat about genetics, but I think that night science is something that any listener can participate in. I think anyone that's just enthusiastic and wants to pick up a pop science book from time to time or check out a science podcast is going to find themselves having novel insights all the time. And as I think, just as the world becomes more scientifically literate, as frustrated as I am with the world, and people like not getting like problems that are very specifically scientific, I also think that even trolls that I find myself arguing with online are starting to understand things like confirmation bias and motivated reasoning. And
it's true. Yeah, you could look at this pandemic as like an extended science lesson. Right? Everybody has learned immunology. We've all learned like about controls and trials. Everybody's talking about PCR. I don't know if people know what PCR is, but everybody's like, is it a PCR test or is it antigen? Everybody. So I think that's one silver lining of this.
Yeah, I mean it's rough going through it, but the reason I bring it up is because I think that I think that there's going to be tons of uh I do think that it's not that hard for people to start learning some basic ways to think a little more scientifically, and
Yeah.
then and everyone has a zillion different jobs and occupations. So once we have like, you know, everyone from like a grocery clerk to like a bus driver to someone in the shipping department driving a forklift, thinking scientific, people are just going to have novel insights because of the environment that they're in, and I think that there are some ideal world those insights will get back to the science
I think it's
community as
great. I
well.
think, Carl Sagan, he wrote this book, a great book called The Demon Haunted World, where he just shows the effect of having a population that doesn't think scientifically and effectively is suffering for it. They're haunted by demons,
Hmm.
and scientific reasoning kind of allows you to move past it. So I think it's while still, as Richard Dawkins argues, still I in my mind, you still retain the sense of wonder about life. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the fact that I'm sort of a subscriber to selfish genes and all that theory. Uh, I don't think I see life as any less fascinating. I think just the opposite. I'm just constantly amazed by all of this, and it
Yeah.
doesn't reduce in any bit the creativity or the sense of wonder about life. Not one bit.
Reality is amazing. Yeah,
It really
and
is.
I mean, I think a lot of what genetics especially can teach us is just how much of life is this bottom up emergence that
Yeah.
happens that has a lot more explanatory power than the top down
The
kind
voodoo.
of assigning lots of agency to things where it doesn't
Right.
belong, and theory of mind stuff that gets a little bit out of control, and we tend to like give chaos a personality and stuff in
Yeah.
terms of
That's true.
whether it's the universe or weather or a virus that you can't physically see, and
Yeah. I mean,
and
I think a lot of the traditions that humans have come up with, though, are really useful. And we have to be careful, sort of, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
yeah,
The sense of community
yeah.
that religions give, that's real and that's powerful. It's important. We have to figure out that it's like a real challenge of in our lifetimes is how society kind of keeps all the good stuff, but also brings in the new understanding.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I was only like making the point just because your idea of like taking out the wonder and mystery, like, whew,
Yeah.
it's not. I see. It's obviously easier to see mistakes in other people, and I do the same thing. I'm sure all of the time, but people will. Uh, uh, some people I feel like that are so attached to something that they consider the mystery sometimes view science and just new information as intruding on their territory.
Yeah.
Like, this is my territory. And boy, if I can assure anybody, there there's never going to be a shortage of mystery. Mystery is an
That's right.
unlimited supply. Whatever mystery you think is important to you, it can be proved wrong. You can let go of it. There'll be 10 times the mystery laying behind it that you have no idea about.
Absolutely. We're under no shortage of mystery. Amen.
So, as I let you go, do you want to steer people to um, like 1 to 3 podcast episodes? If a brand new listener what you'd like people to check out?
Check out the new one with Steven Strogatz.
Okay.
There's one,
Ruthless Simplification.
Yeah, Ruthless Simplification. That one we just had a couple of weeks ago. There's one with Michael Strevens, who's a philosopher, and he talks about his book, The Knowledge Machine. There's one with Oded Rechavi. You must follow him on Twitter. This guy's hysterical.
I don't actually.
Oh, you have to check him out. He's the great meme maker. I'm sure you've come across him. He's everywhere, it seems. And he studies transgenerational inheritance that's non-genetic, and it's beautiful. Yeah, those would be a great starting point. We also, awesome. Martin Lurcher and I, we also write editorials about it. So there's a whole kind of, in addition to the podcast, there's also the written sort of theoretical side that if people go, if you just Google Night Science website, they can find it.
Fantastic. I just followed Oded on Twitter. I wasn't on there already. So
no, you won't regret it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Tia.
Itai.
Remember,
it rhymes.
Itai Yanai. Itai Yanai. It rhymes.
We end where we begin.
Sorry about that. Anyway, you're a fantastic guest as usual. This was a really great conversation, and
I hope it's like a Saturday Night Live where a guest can like come back maybe more than twice.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you anytime you like, if you have a new like book come out or anything like that, let me know. We talked about your book last time.
We did that. Yeah.
What's your book again?
The Society of Genes.
The Society of Genes. That's right. Oh my gosh. I forgot.
I must have given you a copy, right? Because you were in my office. I must have given you a copy.
I think so, maybe. I'm not sure. I know I didn't read it.
It's a blur.
But I should. Yeah, I have a zillion books everywhere, as I'm sure you do as well. But we'll check it out. Check out the last podcast to hear about that book. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you more next week. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I've really, in case you haven't been able to tell, I've been trying to reach out to other science communicators this year, and other people that do public, have their own science podcasts, things like this, because I just want people to be more and more inspired to learn more about science. There's only so many subjects I can cover. Everyone does things differently too. And so I know when I listen to podcasts or books or whatever else, I'm in different moods at different times. So I want to introduce you guys to other people that do more science communication, just to turn more people on to science. That's all. I think the world would be a better place if that were the case. If you agree and you want to support what I do, please go to patreon.com/Shane Mauss. This show is funded 100% by your Patreon support. And, I'm not exactly crushing it over there on Patreon. We're paying the bills. But man, podcasting is such incredibly competitive, figuring out what algorithm does what and how to get more viewers and blah, 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 and then get people to pitch in. It's a whole thing. It is what it is. It's all part of the business. I've been thrilled with the quality of this show, especially as we've transitioned from COVID and doing things remotely and improving some of the quality standards in learning in terms of the actual video and audio quality stuff and problem solving, but also just the ability to get guests from wherever at any time has been a fun thing to explore. And I feel like I've grown a bit as a host. So if you want to help support the continued growth of this show and me, and just opportunities to keep on improving and doing more and upgrading and all of that, go to patreon.com/Shane Mauss. Next week's episode, I think, is going to be a One Health Initiative episode. We have a few in the bank, and there's always a few moving pieces that you guys don't necessarily need to know about. All of that is to say, I don't know what episode is next week, but I'm sure it'll be a good one. And I have I'm so excited, putting a lot of energy right now into planning our Mind Under Festival. So go to mindunderpod.com. Like I said, if you will check out the St. Patrick's Day Mind Under Matter episode, we get into the basics of some of the stuff that I said at the beginning of this, and sign up with your email there. We're going to be adding, we want to, we didn't have all of the marketing materials and everything together, because we just wanted it to emerge naturally. So we're going to have a poster and all those various things eventually, but it's not something that we're putting out to the public. We're not going to be like running social media ads and things like that, trying to find people that have never heard of our show to come just because the festival's cool. We want specifically people from within the community, people that are going to want to show up and, meet other people that are inquisitive like yourselves. And by the way, some of the feedback I've gotten so far is because, I'm sort of a heady person and an introvert, a little bit outside of this, and an introspective type person. And because of that, I seemingly attract some similar like-minded people. If you happen to be kind of an introverted person and the idea of going to a festival and stuff isn't normally your thing, and you're worried you won't have people to talk to, it's going to be pretty easy to meet people. We're already planning things to help facilitate that. But just in terms of having a bunch of awesome artists there, sitting there live painting that you can just go up to talk to, who will be thrilled to talk anyone's ear off about their work and talk about their background and anything else. There's going to be a bunch of stuff like that. There's going to be lots and lots of opportunity. In fact, it's the whole point, is to create a fun environment to engage in cool conversations and meet interesting people. We're not going to have like big name bands or musicians or anything like that. We'll have music. To me, it's not going to be the highlight of the festival. I think a lot of the day activities and hanging out in the water and getting to know one another and doing some live podcasts and sharing ideas and stuff is what I look forward to the most. So we'll have music and partying and all that stuff at night, but we're also going to make sure like all of the tents and camping is far away from that for the people that don't like staying up late and aren't as interested in that kind of thing. You'll get to choose your own adventure, and we'll be able to answer more questions soon. If you're on Patreon, you have access to my Discord. And if you aren't on my Patreon and you don't have money for the Patreon, but you want access to my Discord, just write me on the Here We Are site, maybe, or just maybe when you fill in, here's what you do when you go to the Mind Under pod email and you submit your email address. Ask for a Discord link if you happen to not be on Patreon and want to get on Discord, because we have a separate channel. Don't worry if you don't know what Discord is. It's pretty intuitive. But there's a whole channel, just like like a social media feed in a way, but just completely dedicated to the festival. So you can see other people are lining up, carpooling and sorting out who's bringing what, and different camping gear that people will have available and stuff like that. So you can potentially borrow some stuff like that if you're flying in and do things on the cheap. There's people. One person's coming from Australia and wants to spend more time in the United States, so they're finding just like other people in the community to go and like potentially crash with or go on some fun adventures with outside of our festival that weekend. And so there's just a bunch of stuff like that within the community going on, and it's not overwhelming. It's a small community on Discord. This isn't the biggest podcast in the world, and Discord is also kind of a small communal thing on top of that. So it won't take that long to catch up on a lot of things, and you don't need to be worried about not having your questions answered or whatever, because it's a pretty cool small community that the ones that are on there that are active keep up with much of the posts that are happening, through the week. And so, just over explaining everything, but I've already been getting a lot of questions about it, and people are excited. So I'll be filling in more details as things go on. Those of you that listen all the way to the end, you are, of course, my favorites.